Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of The Cleaning Lady. A great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. My favorite form of storytelling, because I'm always giddy about it. I mean, giddy's kind of the wrong word to use when it comes to this situation. But I love storytelling. Some people might have an issue with it, but I always enjoy storytelling where it's just like everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Once again, whether it's like an In the Dark or an Ozark, they're the two prime examples of that. And this whole premiere was that. Everything that could possibly go wrong. I might not be, it's been a while since season one, so I might not be remembering, but probably season one had it as well. But either way, immediately picking up where the season one finale left off, Tony is looking for Marco, and she's having no luck finding him. And it is this interesting thing that regardless of what Marco does, Fiona does keep defending him. And the only one who doesn't, I mean, Jazz and Chris don't defend him. In fact, Chris is like, why do you stick up for him so much? You always said he was a spoiled brat. And it's like, yeah, he was. But the thing is, no one ever messed with me because I had my brother's back. But it's like your grandma and your grandfather always chose him. So yeah, he is kind of a spoiled brat. It's like, he does suck, but it still doesn't change the fact is for her, it's like, you're my brother and I love you, because that's the difference though. It's like, yes, Luca's family and so is her brother, and kind of being caught between Tony and Marco. Because yes, they're all family, but Marco's her brother. She's known her brother obviously longer than Tony, so she's always more willing to see his good side, because even she was Tony had to tell her last season, do you not know your brother? We were in such a rough situation. We were going to lose our home because he was gambling stuff away. The fact that we also are friends because he owed so many people money. I had to get away from him. I had to rush to get Luca here to the U.S. so he can get his treatments and stuff like that. I wasn't really concerned about Marco, and a lot of that plays a role in this episode, but because Fiona didn't want Garrett called because she didn't want a cop involved in all of this, because it's like, hey, he could get arrested, which even Chris is like, isn't that fine? The fact is, because it's like, right, if he gets arrested, you're going to find out he's undocumented, he's going to get sent back home, and he's going to be sent home without the rest of his family because Fiona and them are going to stay here. At the very least, they'd have their parents, which I didn't even think about that as an angle of things. I figured I was more focused on what's happening in the U.S. and what it means for Fiona and Chris. The ending, which we'll talk about later, I didn't even think about what it means with Fiona having to tell their parents about that. So it's like, God, that's going to be an awkward conversation. Like I said, we'll talk about that when we get to it. But Tony does call in Garrett, which really quickly, Garrett's kind of going through his own complications because he's trying to make sure the whole Armand and Hayek thing sticks. Hayek gone, done. Armand, not as much. Until they find the money, they can't hold Armand. And so he knows something's still at play here. He's even asking later on, is like, right, Tony, why are you staying here? Not unless there's other reasons why you're staying. It's like, she decided to stay for a multitude of reasons, because this is where Fiona, Chris, and Jazz are. But, and this is where Luca's kind of seeing as his new home. But also, there's nothing back there in Manila for them. Especially Tony brought up something interesting. I don't know if she brought this up last season. Maybe she did. It definitely caught my attention this time. Maybe it came up last season and caught my attention then. But her specifically, we cannot go back home because you can't. It's illegal to get divorced. I was like, Jesus. It's like, yeah, considering your husband has a gambling addiction, there's no there's probably no separation or just getting divorced. It's like, yeah, you're kind of in it till it's like, right, you're gonna have to make it work. I'm like, yeah, I can understand why Tony probably wouldn't want to go back, because it's like, right, she tried to make things work with Marco when he came to Las Vegas last season, but it's like, he is too much in conflict with everything she's mixed up in, which understandable, but he has his own issues on top of everything. Once again, let's not forget, this is the same guy that took money from Tony and gambled it. Yeah, he sets enough aside for Luca's situation to pay off what it was they were trying to pay off at the time. Doesn't change the fact is he endangered everything by taking that money. It's like, oh, I'm responsible enough to stick some money aside. It's like, you weren't responsible enough not to put you in enough gambling debt that you guys are going to lose your home back home, plus all your friends are avoiding you like you're the plague. So it's that thing of you feel bad for Marco, but at other times you can. I find myself caught between Fiona and Chris, and even Tony. Whereas like Tony loves him, but it's like I also hate you at times too. I super don't like you just because so you kind of find yourself in that middle ground where you're like, I understand a lot of extenuating circumstances that put him in this position, but there's also the fact is you did all this behind Tony's back. You don't even, not even adding in, what did he say to Tony? He's like, oh, you could leave me behind, but I knew you wouldn't stay if your son was going. I was like, wow, you sound like such a manipulative tool right now. The fact is that I'm like, that's psychotic that he's like, I'm going to take, I love that. He's like, earlier, she's like, you kidnapped him. It's like, he's my son. Every time he talks to Tony for the rest of the episode, your son. Because even Tony's like, he took Luca just to hurt me. And Fiona didn't believe that. He straight up said, oh, I took Luca because I knew if I went home with him, you have no choice but to come home. But it's like, Luca's better now, so it's fine. Like, what's making you stay here? And it's like, oh, it's Armand. It's like, yes, it's jealousy. It's like, yes, there is something going on between Tony and Armand, which even Fiona threw it out there. But then, like, Fiona was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't even said that. Because it's like, why, unless you want to stay in business with Armand because there's something going on there. But it's also like, Marco hasn't been the greatest guy, And it's like, yeah, that's the sad thing that, yeah, Armand, not the greatest guy either, but he still treats Tony, he's more so there for Tony and Luca than you are. That's kind of sad in the long run. Yeah, I mean, don't get it twisted. Like, he hasn't always treated Tony 100% right, because sometimes he lets that power go to his head, and he kind of doesn't there were moments in season 1 he didn't treat her right, but it's still like, yeah, the fact is that the gangster treats her better than you do, and, and he's kind of done more he has done less to endanger Luca than you have to some extent, so... That was just the fact is he was like, I knew if I took Luca, you would be forced to come home. I'm like, and he's just like, we could be a family. She's like, our marriage is over. And it's like, she's like, we can work this, because he's like, oh, we could be a family. She's like, okay, let's just work this out. He was acting like, if you looking at him, he's like so erratic and out of his mind right now. Like, once again, saying that, he seems so psychotic. Like, oh, I knew if I took Luca, you'd come. And it's like, holy crap, bro. And even, Garrett tried to tell her, I was like, hey, like, I'm helping you out with the whole thing of finding your son. They just missed him and Luca. They ended up getting out to the airport, but it's like, right, shouldn't you go home like that way? Go home with your sister and everything. It's like, which for one, that's rich coming from you. And that's what, I mean, because of the whole, like, you nearly getting them all deported, their friend deported last season, but also almost getting Tony and Fiona deported. So there's that situation, and it's like, it's ironic coming from him saying all that, and there's extenuating and complicated circumstances for Fiona, the whole Chris of it all and the whole Jazz of it all, because that was also a thing too where Chris was like, this could have been the last time we saw Luca, why are you defending him? And she's like, oh, don't talk like that. He's like, it is like, if Aunt Tony leaves, she could never come back to the States. Jazz might be able to go and visit, probably, I guess, because she has like that, maybe a dual citizenship type of situation going on. Because she was actually born here in the U.S., so it won't be too much of a legal issue. But because of them, it's like it'd be a whole thing for them because of their status as well. Because once again, Chris wasn't born in the U.S. like he thought he was. He found that out last season from his mom. Either way. So, but Garrett having that whole conversation of like, right, shouldn't you want a fresh start and stuff like that? He's like, I don't know anything about your marriage. She's like, you're right, you don't. Because we, as the audience, know like what she went through, why she had to get away. I mean, it was more so for Luca, but it was also, there were so many reasons to get away from Marco and what he was doing. So there's all of that. God. Either way, let's go ahead and just jump to it then, since we're on this whole conversation. That argument turning into what it did, I figured things were going to go sideways. Didn't expect that. I thought, like, okay, like, he's going to push on Chris, and then Fiona and Tony are going to be like, oh my God, like, maybe it'd make, like, the way he was pushing on Chris, maybe I thought, like, okay, Fiona would change her mind, be like, oh my God, my brother's actually kind of a terrible person. we didn't even get to that point because he starts shoving Chris, being like, oh, don't wake Luca up, because Chris is like, no, I'm going to be here for Luca in case he wakes up. I don't want him to be bothered by all this. He shouldn't have to hear you guys arguing. And Chris accidentally pushes. I was like, come on, like, is he knocked unconscious? It's like, nope, Marco is dead. I was like, wow, okay. I guess at first I was like, oh, I guess she kind of got rid of that problem, but it is like, well, that kind of turns into an even bigger problem on so many levels. Because Tony goes in to talk to the manager, who he sees her over the body. He's probably, like we see later on, he was looking at surveillance footage. Like, either he wasn't looking at it and earlier and he already knew what was what, or he didn't like look at it earlier. But he saw her near the body and was like, but I was like, did she see him? Please tell me she saw him. Because I'm like, the last thing you want to do is walk away from this crime scene. But it's like, okay, good. You saw him. But he's like, she's like, can you call the cops? He's like, I don't want no trouble. Why don't you call the cops? She's like, I'm not here legally, so I can't. I'll get in trouble. Thank you. And just the way he was acting, I was like, that guy's super suspicious. Like, oh, he's going to be a thorn in your side. Super is, because later on when Tony had to return to the crime scene, which she did a good job, considering like she didn't have the solitude and the time to properly clean the whole situation. She wiped down their prints and she took Marco's cards and his money and his wedding ring to make it look like a mugging. So there's that. So you're like, oh, okay, that's, and regardless of it all, even in that moment, Tony feels bad because it's more so like, damn, my son's father's dead. It's like, yeah, she still had love for Marco. It's just, there was just so much, let's face it, some fuck shit he was on that kind of tainted that love. But at the end of the day, this was still someone you loved. Also, once again, your son's going to be asking questions about where his dad is, and you're going to have to dodge that question forever. And like I said, later on, Fiona's going to have to deal with the complications of, well, one, my brother's dead. Two, my son did it. So that's going to be all complicated things, especially for Chris. It's like, man, I killed someone. And the only person, and especially because Chris already had a lot to lash out about last season. God, he's going to be lashing out so much this season, bottling that all up, because he can't even talk like him and Jazz, because Jazz is going to be super in the dark. There's going to be this big secret between the three of them. It's like, right, no one's going to like hurt this family. Like I said, Fiona's going to have to explain this to their parents to some extent, like make it seem like a regular robbery, but knowing the truth. And I wouldn't say it's out of the realm of possibility that Fiona will kind of put this all on Tony. It's like, because the argument can be made. I don't think it should, but from a certain perspective, you could be like, Fiona could understandably be like, this is kind of on you, Tony. For one, you're the one that got the cops involved, and because you did that, things escalate to this point. Truth be told, this is also like, right, if you hadn't gotten mixed up in the whole Armand thing and the Garrett thing, like, we wouldn't even be here right now. Maybe Marco wouldn't have even had all the reasons. It's like, that's the thing. We're living in what ifs. There is no what ifs in this situation. The reality is what the reality is. So there is no changing it. There's no turning back time. So for Fiona, it's probably going to be a thing of, it's because of your situation, the way you've handled stuff, it kind of, and I'm curious how she's going to feel about it, because it's like, right, she kept defending her brother over and over again, and now it's like, well, he put hands on my son, and it was an accident, but it's like, did that color her perspective on Marco any differently? Is she going to be like upset, or is she going to be upset at herself for not being too upset? I don't know. But also the guy at the hotel or motel is super going to blackmail Tony and them, because he's like, you see that smile on his face. It's like, oh, this is an opportunist son of a bitch. It's going to be like, oh yeah. He's going to take advantage of the situation. So once again, the Marco thing turned into another hindrance. I'm also curious because Garrett had this look on his face. I wonder how long did Tony take. I was like, Garrett didn't say anything, so I'm assuming Tony was like, oh my God, I was in the neighborhood, because no conversation came up. I was like, she had to make sure she didn't show up at that crime scene too quickly, so. But like I said, the manager at the hotel or whatever, motel, I keep saying hotel, motel, was like, oh, he noticed Tony and her hugging her son. So it's like, but that look on Garrett's face almost made you go like, does he think like there was something's off about this? Despite everything, the guy's got really good instincts. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens on that front. Speaking of Garrett, I think I talked about it, started on that area earlier, right? Because I was talking about Armand and Hayek's case. There's also a little bit about Garrett's past, particularly like one of the cases he worked on last before he basically was in the FBI's shit list, is that the previous case, someone else is taking over it. There's the CI that he slept with. I believe that is the person they were talking about in this episode, Maya. apparently she was just a bartender that, was mixed, gave info, but now it turns out she's actually selling drugs for this person. So that's Garrett's side of things, and I'm assuming that's going to tie into the whole Armand and Hayek thing, because earlier in the beginning of the episode, Hayek wants Armand out of prison. So it's like, cool, I want to leave everything to you so that you can make sure our competitors, which I'm assuming who Maya is working for, is going to end up being competitors trying to fill that void where Hayek's gang was. Because, yeah, Hayek has his connections and stuff, but he's still like, oh, his entire organization was dismantled. So they're going to have to kind of rebuild that to some extent. And Hayek is kind of suspicious of Armand. Sadly for Armand, Hayek had one of the guards put a listening device in to prove, like, no. Yep, Armand's the rat. He sold you out, because Hayek just had some feeling. I think it's specific Armand being like, yeah, I'll run the organization. In that moment, Hayek was almost like, what the hell did you just say? It's like, no, it was no longer like I'm going to handle things in your place. It was like, oh, I'm going to run the organization. And he was almost like yeah, it is interesting how everything, because that's why Armand wanted to get out of prison sooner, because it's like, the longer I stay here, the longer Hayek has to piece things together. So sadly, it took even less time for them to piece things together. Also, Garrett being such a dick, being like, oh, you want one of these donuts? He's like, you sure you want one? Taste it. He's like, I'm like, you're such a douche, Garrett. Then there's the whole Nadia thing. She can't get in contact with Tony. To be fair, Tony was dealing with kind of more pressing issues. And then, once again, it's like, why do you trust this woman so much with the money and stuff? I mean, she might be at the airport right now, which she was, but for different reasons. So it's like, right, she kept ignoring Nadia's phone, and I think it speaks volumes. Nadia kept calling despite everything going on. To be fair, it was in the height of, okay, Luke is missing. To be fair, he was still missing because she had, at that time, no idea where Marco was. But the moment Armand calls, she picks up. I think that, to be fair, she doesn't like Nadia, because Nadia doesn't like her either. So, which is sad, because of where things started, they seem like they could have been friends until things like, well, turned into a whole thing of like, right, you're secretly in love with my husband and my husband's secretly in love with you. I mean, no secret to even her or the audience, but still. Which, that whole thing led to a conversation between Tony and Fee about, like, oh, we want to open our own place, like, we can help people out, because Tony wants to open her own clinic, but their aspirations about the dreams, they wanted to take this money and do some good with, but it's like, right, some of that money's got to be spent paying off a judge so Armand can get out of jail, which the FBI is aware of that, and they're trying to get in front of that, so, but Fee doesn't want to get mixed up in all this. She's like, right, we could just like, we could still handle stuff. We don't need Armand. It's like Tony does like him, but also like she does owe him with everything that he's done for her. So she feels indebted to him. Once again, Armand's kind of got a bit of a Nadia kind of threw it in his face last season, but it's like, yeah, he does have a bit of a hero complex because he wants to be seen as a good guy, even though he's not necessarily the good guy, so. I think he likes the way Tony looks at him, because like the way Tony looks at him is the way no one else look at him, and it kind of gives him a little bit of a hero complex, which I think is kind of an interesting thing in comparison to, like, I think Garrett kind of goes above and beyond because he's got a little bit of a hero complex. Like, it's like both of them, and I said this in my nerd mode that I did for this, is like both of them have just so much to prove to their respective organizations, but also to themselves. Such interesting parallels. Either way, I love the whole thing of Tony and Fee, like, getting the money out. And it's like, I love her having to come back every so often. They kind of putting on a new disguise, go in, go out every couple minutes, to make, like, small withdrawals. Because you don't want to do too big, because if you do too big of a thing, it's going to be probably flagged and noticed. So she's got to go in, go out the same place over and over again, trying to, like, I think Tony said, like, there's one on, like, every block. So, like, she might not have necessarily been 100% going to this. I don't think she was going to the same place over and over again, but it was, like, right, money from the same account being, like, crypto being sold off so you could get, hard cash. But yeah, the FBI became aware of it because Hayek is selling the whole thing out, because it's like, oh, he wants to make sure, like, oh, he wants to lessen his sentence while also screwing, Armand over. And so they freeze the account so they didn't get all the money out. So that sucks. So that still needs to be dealt with next episode. but also Armand, unfortunately got put in gym pop and ends up getting jumped by people. Like, I think maybe it's just people in general that were going to jump him, but I'm assuming Hayek set that up because the guard put on the headphones and closed his door. He's like, yeah. Armand held to his own. Still not the easiest thing, taking on multiple people at one time. Still got shanked, and you're like, wow, he's not in a good condition. You have, at the same time, them carting off Marco's body too. So it's just, like I said, everything that could go wrong went wrong, and that this is a wild ass way to start the season, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited to have the cleaning lady back, and I'm so excited to see what this season takes us. When the trailers I am aware of, I've avoided them. I think the only one that was out at the time, I think I saw about it, was like at one point in time, the only thing I saw was like a 30-second trailer. It was like mainly stuff from this episode, I think, and like recapping some of the stuff from season 1. It was like a minute-long trailer. So there might have been a longer trailer out. I didn't see it. There's the preview at the end of this episode being like, okay, this season of Clean Lake. I avoided that like hell because I don't want to know anything. I'm excited to see where this season takes us because it's going to be a wild, wild ride. So I'm so excited to see where all this takes us. I'm curious to see what happens with the Armand situation, especially because Tony and them weren't able to get all the money out. So going to have to talk to Nadia about that, which Nadia is probably going to be pissed because it's like, right, you should have done so sooner. If you had picked up my calls, we wouldn't even be in this situation. To be fair, she was dealing with so much at the time, and now it's like, oh my God, those dominoes are going to start falling too. I'm really interested to see how Fiona feels next episode. Like I said, there's a chance she won't blame Tony, but there's a part of me like, if she decided to, I could understand where she's coming from. I wouldn't want her to blame Tony, but, because Marco's decisions were Marco decisions, but they were influenced by Tony stuff, but it's still like, there was something inside of him that was like messed up that kind of, so we'll just have to wait and see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.